There is a deep deception that has crept into the language of even the people of God. The word luck. It sounds harmless. It slips into our speech unnoticed. I guess I just got lucky. What a lucky break. But in the economy of heaven, there is no such thing as luck. In the courts of the Most High, nothing is by accident. In the language of the Spirit, there is no room for the randomness of man's fortune. For those who belong to God, everything is ordered, every step established, every detail woven by a hand unseen, not luck, but divine favor. The world leans on probability. It builds its confidence on statistics and chance, but we do not lean on dice or fortune cookies. We do not walk through life guided by blind fate. We are children of covenant, and that changes everything. You see, when the world looks at a closed door suddenly opening, it says, that was lucky. But when a child of God sees it, they know the King of Glory just turned the key. When the world sees a person spared from destruction, they say, what a coincidence. But heaven says, that was my covering, that was my shield, that was my hand. You did not arrive at this moment by a series of lucky events. You are not the product of happenstance. You are the product of purpose. The same God who numbered the hairs on your head has also numbered your days. He orders your steps. He goes before you and prepares the way. And sometimes the way he prepares looks like a detour. Sometimes it looks like a delay. Sometimes it looks like the opposite of blessing. But in the end, when the veil is lifted, when the full picture is seen, you realize that even the wrong turns were part of the right path. Even the trials were preparation. Even the storms were assignments. Even the silence was a divine strategy. There was nothing lucky about the Israelites walking through the Red Sea. The wind didn't just happen to blow that day. The sea didn't part because nature got confused. It parted because the word of the Lord went forth. Because the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had made a covenant, and he does not break his word. It was not luck that they crossed on dry ground. It was not fortune that Pharaoh's army was swallowed in the deep. It was not chance. It was the fulfillment of a divine promise. And you are living under that same covenantal God. Do not call your breakthroughs lucky. Do not dishonor your deliverer by crediting his intervention to fate. How many times have you survived what should have taken you out? How many nights did you feel alone, but angels stood guard around you? How many closed doors kept you from destruction? How many times did things fall apart only for something greater to rise from the ruins? The hand of God has been upon you from the beginning. Before your first breath, he formed you. Before your first cry, he consecrated you. That job you didn't apply for and still got, that bill that was paid when there was no money in sight, that diagnosis that turned around, that accident that missed you by inches, the people who walked out and left you, only to make room for the ones he ordained to stay. Don't dare call those moments lucky. That's not luck, that's design, that's orchestration, that's sovereignty, that's favor. You are covered by something the world cannot comprehend. You are sustained by a grace that no algorithm can calculate. What looks like a coincidence to man is a fulfillment of prophecy to heaven. What the world shrugs off as good fortune, the kingdom recognizes as divine alignment. You're not riding waves of chance. You are being carried by the wind of the Spirit. Every intersection, every delay, every connection, every shut door, every open gate marked by the fingerprints of a faithful God. There is no Hebrew word for luck in the language of the Torah. That's no accident. The people of God were never meant to live by chance. They were called to live by covenant. The blessings were conditional upon obedience, yes, but they were not random. They were never random. If you walk in my ways, says the Lord, then I will bless you. If you keep my commandments, I will be with you in the fire. I will be with you in the flood. I will go before you and be your rear guard. That is not a gamble. That is a promise sealed in blood. That is not fortune. That is favor poured out from the throne of heaven. And when we look at the lives of those whom God has chosen throughout history, it becomes apparent that what the world often sees as misfortune is actually the divine unfolding of a greater plan. The Bible is full of stories of men and women who faced incredible odds, seemingly hopeless situations, and yet in the end they emerged victorious, not because they were lucky, but because they were favored by God. Take Joseph, for example. He was the youngest son of Jacob, his father's favorite, which already set the stage for jealousy and conflict. His brothers, consumed by envy, sold him into slavery. He was taken to a foreign land, stripped of his freedom, his family, and everything he had known. From the surface, this was nothing short of misfortune. If anyone ever had a reason to say, I've had bad luck, it was Joseph. He found himself in a pit, literally and figuratively, as his brothers threw him into a cistern, contemplating what would become of his life. But what looked like the cruelty of his brothers, what looked like a terrible stroke of bad luck, was actually the beginning of God's greater plan for Joseph. Even in slavery, Joseph's favor was evident. He was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Joseph, through God's blessing, rose to a position of prominence. There is a battle being waged for your vision. The world wants you to see things through a lens of natural perception, to measure everything by the standards of logic and reason, to attribute success to talent, to attribute failure to fate, to reduce everything to the visible and the explainable. But God calls you to see with spiritual eyes, to look beyond the surface, beyond the circumstances, and to perceive the hand of God moving in ways the world cannot comprehend. The enemy seeks to blind you to the truth that God is orchestrating every detail of your life, even when you cannot see his hand. He wants you to believe that what happens in your life is a result of chance, of luck, of mere coincidence. But heaven's perspective is different. Heaven sees not randomness, but the purposes of God being worked out in every moment, even when they are hidden from your understanding. The Apostle Paul writes that we are not to walk by sight, but by faith. This is not just a theological concept, it is a practical call to live by a different set of eyes. When you begin to see with spiritual eyes, you understand that your life is not governed by the whims of fortune or the roll of a dice. You realize that you are a part of something much bigger, a story that is being written by the author of your life. When you look at the events of your life through a spiritual lens, you see God's hand in the most unlikely places. You see him moving in the moments when things seem to be falling apart, when your plans are interrupted, when doors are closed, or when your prayers seem unanswered. The truth is that what the world calls luck is often the invisible hand of God at work. The world sees an opportunity that opens up seemingly out of nowhere and calls it good fortune. The world looks at a chance encounter and calls it serendipity. But those who see through the eyes of the Spirit know that nothing in their lives is by coincidence. Every connection, every delay, every change of direction, it is all part of God's perfect plan. We are called to live with the understanding that everything that happens in our lives is under the sovereignty of a loving and purposeful God. There is no such thing as a random encounter when we are walking in his will. There is no such thing as an accidental success when we are in the center of his purpose. This is why it is so important to guard our spiritual vision. The enemy will do everything he can to cloud your perception and distract you from seeing the work of God in your life. He will use the challenges you face to make you believe that you are simply the victim of circumstance. He will try to convince you that what happens to you is just a result of bad luck or some inevitable chain of events rather than part of God's plan to shape, refine, and position you for greater things. But when you see with spiritual eyes, you know that every challenge, every trial, every season of waiting is not the result of some impersonal fate. It is part of God's master plan. This is why it is critical to develop spiritual discernment. The Bible tells us that we should be wise, discerning, and careful with what we allow to influence our hearts and minds. We must cultivate a vision that looks beyond the natural. When we see life through the natural eye, we may only see what is happening in front of us. We may see obstacles and setbacks, failures and disappointments. We may only perceive things as good or bad based on our own limited understanding. But when we allow God to sharpen our spiritual vision, we begin to see what he sees. We begin to recognize his fingerprints on every part of our lives, even in the places we once thought were abandoned or forgotten. Take the story of David, for instance. When Samuel came to anoint a new king from the house of Jesse, he looked at all the sons of Jesse, tall, strong, capable men, and assumed that surely the next king would be one of them. But God had a different plan. He didn't see what Samuel saw. God told Samuel, man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. David, the youngest and least likely, was chosen to be the king. What Samuel saw as an oversight, God saw as a divine appointment. When David faced Goliath, it wasn't luck that allowed him to defeat the giant. It wasn't chance that he had the right stones or that he was in the right place at the right time. It was the hand of God guiding him, leading him, positioning him in a place of destiny. David's life was a series of events that, to the natural eye, might have seemed like mere coincidence. But to those with spiritual vision, it was clear that God was at work in every moment. In the battles, in the betrayals, in the wilderness seasons. God was working through it all, preparing David for the throne, shaping him into a man after God's own heart. The same is true for you. The enemy will try to make you believe that the closed doors, the delays, the disappointments are just unfortunate events. He wants you to think that you are at the mercy of fate. But when you see with spiritual eyes, you know that none of it is by chance. Your steps are ordered. Your life is not an accident. The God who created you, who formed you in your mother's. When we look at the lives of those who have walked faithfully with God, we see a clear pattern. It is a pattern that defies the natural laws of luck, fortune, or chance. The blessings that followed them were not the the result of random events, they were the outcome of a faithful covenant with a sovereign God. This understanding should shape the way we view our own lives. We should never mistake the divine favor we receive for luck. The blessings we experience are not accidents, they are appointments, the hand of God actively guiding us, positioning us, and leading us to places of destiny. One of the most striking examples of this truth is found in the life of Esther. When we first meet her, Esther is a young Jewish woman living in the Persian Empire. She was an orphan, living in exile far from her homeland. From a natural standpoint, Esther had every reason to believe that her life would be marked by misfortune. She had no power, no influence, no status. Yet, through a series of events that seemed like pure coincidence, Esther found herself chosen to be the queen of Persia. It might have seemed like luck to an outside observer, but to those with spiritual eyes, it was clear God was at work. Esther's rise to the throne was no accident. It was the result of divine intervention, carefully orchestrated by God. Every moment in her story, from her adoption by Mordecai to her selection as queen to her courageous intervention to save her people, was part of a larger plan. It was not by luck that she was in the right place at the right time. It was not by chance that she was given favor in the eyes of the king. It was the hand of God positioning her for a moment of destiny. In her story, we see the truth that we are not victims of random events, but rather vessels for God's divine plan. Consider the moment when Esther is faced with the life-threatening decision to approach the king on behalf of her people. She knew that approaching the king without being summoned could result in her death, but in that moment, when everything seemed uncertain and the odds seemed stacked against her, Esther understood the deeper truth. She was not in this position by luck, but by divine appointment. She declared that if she perished, but she would go before the king, knowing that God had placed her there for such a time as this, and as we know, God turned what seemed like a perilous situation into a triumph, saving the Jewish people from destruction. Esther's story reveals a profound truth. God's favor is not an accident. It is not something that happens by chance. It is part of his divine plan for his people, and it is a mark of the covenant he has made with them. Just as he positioned Esther for a specific purpose, so he positions each of us. There are no coincidences in the life of a believer. Every step we take, every door that opens, every relationship that develops, it is all part of the plan God has for us. We are not walking through life hoping for good luck. We are walking by divine purpose, led by the hand of God. There's this thing, however, that has guarded the journey. Think about the Israelites as they journeyed through the wilderness. They were in a barren place, wandering with no visible sign of a future. Their path was uncertain. It seemed like nothing could go right. Yet, in the midst of their wandering, God was actively guiding them. When they were thirsty, he provided water from a rock. When they were hungry, he sent manna from heaven. When they were under attack, he fought for them. It would have been easy for them to call it luck, to attribute their survival to mere happenstance, but the truth was that their survival and blessings were the result of God's covenant with them. He had promised to be with them, to lead them, to protect them, and to provide for them. Every step they took, every victory they achieved, was the result of God's faithfulness to his promises. And this same faithfulness extends to us. In our own lives, we may find ourselves in situations that seem bleak or hopeless. We may face challenges that appear insurmountable. But just as God led the Israelites through the wilderness, he is leading us. Just as he provided for them, he is providing for us. The blessings we receive are not a product of chance. They are a product of God's faithfulness and his covenant with us. He is actively working on our behalf, orchestrating the events of our lives to fulfill his purpose. This understanding should fill us with a deep sense of peace and confidence. We are not at the mercy of random circumstances. We are not subject to the whims of fate. We are children of the Most High God, and our lives are under the influence of his divine plan. Every moment is infused with his purpose. Every victory is a testimony of his faithfulness. Every blessing is a result of his favor, not luck. As we walk in this truth,